Hello and welcome everybody to the Southern Souls podcast. My name is Aaron Goldstein, a longtime listener, first-time host. Coming to you today from my studio where I operate. It's called Baldwin Street Sound. We're in downtown Toronto. And my guest today is Kaia Kater. Hello, Kaia.
Hello, Aaron.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Right on.
How are you?
Great, thanks. It's nice to see you. Full disclosure, we should mention that you have a new record that was made here, and I got the chance to work on it a little bit, which was great. I was stoked about that.
Yeah,
likewise. We know each other a little bit, but yeah, great to have you here on the podcast. This is episode of an indeterminate number. We think we're not sure what number.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, yeah, great to have you. So you have this new record coming out, but we'll get to that in a minute. Some of your press indicated that you have a family connection to folk music. Can you give us some further insight into that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it starts with my grandfather. His name is Wolfgang Kater. And he is originally from Germany, immigrated to Montreal after the Second World War. And he was really interested in building things, and originally went to McGill for architecture, but then decided that really wasn't his calling or his thing. And so he kind of convinced the dean to let him pursue a kind of self-driven degree in instrument building. So for a long time he built like harpsichords and viola da gambas and more classically based instruments. And then eventually I think he just got really into like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and that idea of like the free-spirited kind of musician that, you know, even though you don't have a lot of money, you still have worth and value. So he never sold a guitar. He started making guitars and then he would just give them to people. And that was his sort of philosophy.
Where was he operating at this time?
He was working out of Rockburn, Quebec.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He had a little workshop there.
Cool.
Yeah, and so, you know, my mom also, I think probably being in that environment, was really conscious of folk music and of, I think, community organizing too. And then she kind of married all those things together and started working for folk festivals and stuff like that. Right. And then I was sort of like in the middle of that. Right.
And so you kind of felt like driven towards folk music because of that kind of familial thing? Like, is that what you remember listening to when you were young?
But weirdly, no. Like, I was listening to a lot of hip hop and you know, the music of 2006, which must have been like Green Day. And
sure. Like what you listen to when you're young. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I did have a lot of records like Danielle Lanois records and Ricky Lee Jones and things that, like, I was heavily influenced by music that I'd heard around the house, but I didn't really observe folk music as like a choice. It was more so like just something like a language that was already there.
Interesting. And so I understand you have this West Virginia connection. When did that come about? Did you spend some time there or something? Or?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so I went
to
school there for 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and got a bachelor's degree in religion and philosophy.
Oh, okay. So that's more of a recent thing then.
Yeah, that's super recent. But I mean, it was connected to the fact that, like, you know, I started to play banjo when I was, you know, 12 or 13 around that time, and I was playing the cello too, and sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to say, and the banjo was helpful in that way of like just being a tool for songwriting.
Sure.
And then I mean, I was supposed to go originally. I was supposed to graduate high school, and I'd been accepted to an like an international studies program essentially. And at the University of Winnipeg, and I like last minute ditched that, and eventually kind of ended up in West Virginia, playing the banjo and getting this liberal arts degree.
Interesting. The banjo thing, is that like do you have banjo playing influences? Like, did it come out of like music that you heard? Like, what drew you to the banjo?
I really don't know.
And would you call it kind of your primary instrument, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I really don't know. I think I just liked how it sounded. I think that's like the basis of my relationship with the banjo. And I've heard Justin Robinson, who's a member of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, he said that about it too. It's like beyond all of the conceptions of it, like in popular consciousness, it just sounds cool.
Right.
And so yeah, I think that was like the originating attraction for me.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you remember when you first played for people, or what made you want to play for people first? Is this like a long time thing? Have you been in front of people since you were really young, or how did it go?
I mean, I did the recital thing.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure a lot
on
of
what?
people
On
have.
piano,
Piano
yeah.
and then cello. And
so is piano your first instrument?
yeah, it's the first instrument
Right,
I started
for a lot of
playing.
people,
For a lot of
yeah.
people, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think for a long time I've had this ambivalence about performing,
Right.
because I think
Too late now.
Sorry?
It's too late now.
It's too late now, yeah.
It's kind of what you do, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, to me, it's like the only way to make the art live is
Right.
to play it in front of people and for people, and like
Interesting.
have that interaction in that one space and time.
Yeah, and I mean, folk music is supposed to be this great, like, living art, right? It's supposed to be
Yeah.
like an oral tradition passed down, right? So it's kind of like integral to its whole thing that you
Yeah.
that you perform it, right?
That you perform it.
But then again, like, I don't know, you have records now. People are going to hear records, like,
Yeah, well,
Doesn't
and
that-
that's an interesting conversation that started to happen. Like when you think about artists like Frank Ocean, you know, like
Yep.
he is a recording artist, and he pretty much like rarely plays
Right.
live. You know, and like it's true. Like maybe I should revise that statement of like you know, it's not the only way to have your art living and interacting, but I think like especially for folk music, it's a primary way. And so I see performing as you know, something that's, I think on a fundamental level, terrifying, because you're this animal that is surrounded by a whole bunch of other animals staring at you.
Yeah,
And I think
true.
there's this like fight or flight response that's like, you know, thousands, millions of years back that induces nervousness. But also I think there's this like transcendent thing that you can experience that is equally fascinating. And so it's always been kind of a double-edged sword for me. And I hear that, I think, with a lot of musicians, that's like the appeal of playing live and playing in front of people.
oh, totally.
Is
Yeah.
that kind of like, will it work?
Right.
Is it gonna, you know?
It's definitely like a rush like nothing else. Or I mean, it can be, depending on your scenario. But no, yeah, that's definitely a thing.
Yeah.
If you had your way, would you not perform? Would you rather just make records? Like, what's
No, I definitely would. Yeah,
You're into it.
I absolutely would. I think the way that I can tell that I need to make new music is when I become too comfortable on stage playing the material. I think that's when I'm like, okay, I need to create new things so that I can get to a place where I'm growing, you know, and I'm not just going on autopilot. So
Right.
I really enjoy that side of it, and I like wrestling with it and trying to figure out different ways to appeal to an audience and to connect to an audience and all of those things. So yeah, it's a really enticing part of the job for me. It's not I'm not like
Yeah.
on the verge of you're not on the verge of never seeing me again.
Yeah.
I promise.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad. Okay, well, speaking of new music, so you have this new record that's it's been out for a week or so, right, or a couple weeks?
Yeah, a few weeks. Yeah,
Yeah, right on. It's called Grenades, and it is your third, right?
it's my third record. Yeah.
Okay. And so, from what I understand, I've obviously heard the record. I got to work on it. That was super great, and I was happy to be a part of it. And what I understood immediately lyrically, and what I kind of understand now from what you've put out there about the record, is that it's centered around your relationship with Grenada. Your father's from Grenada. Do you want to get into that a little bit? Yeah, you went down there, I guess, and researched the record a little bit.
Yeah, so my dad is a refugee. He came to Canada in 1986 from Grenada, which is a small island, like you were saying, in the Lesser Antilles of the Caribbean, so kind of off the like northeastern coast of Venezuela. Yeah, I mean, in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot going on. Reagan was in power. There was kind of the Nicaraguan Contra War. There was some stuff going on in Iran. There was, I think, this overarching sentiment that capitalism was under threat or under siege,
Right.
which I think the more you accumulate as a country, and the more, if I can be so bold, the more myths that you create about yourself, the more you feel like people are coming to get you, and the more paranoid you feel. And so in 1979, there was a guy named Morris Bishop, who was a barrister, who was born in Grenada but had gone to train in England and had gotten his education and come home. And he was part of a group of young revolutionaries called the New Jewel Movement. And their overarching belief was that Grenada, despite having its independence from England, was still kind of beholden to developed nations, and so he basically led a peaceful revolution to overthrow the prime minister at the time, Eric Gary, and he instituted quite a few policy moves that were kind of based around socialism and peaceful Black nationalism. So one of the programs was called Each One Teach One, and at the time there was a 50% literacy rate, so half of the adult population could read and half the adult population couldn't. And so he asked those who could to find someone who couldn't and teach them how to read, and so the literacy rate increased, I think, to 90 or 95%. And so it was about kind of keeping things in-house, and that, like, Black self-actualization and self-realization outside of the frame of being sort of this backyard to a lot of world powers and a ping pong ball to a lot of world powers, which a lot of Caribbean countries are. Puerto Rico, Haiti, right. the Dominican Republic, Cuba was one of those islands that was rejecting that. So, this was seen as a big threat to Ronald Reagan, who was in power at the time. 79 through 83, Morris Bishop had tried to reach out to Reagan, but there was a lot of static there. And in 1983, October 25th of 1983, Reagan was facing an election year, and he needed a win. And so there is suspicion that there's seeds of distrust sown within Morris Bishop's cabinet, and a member of his cabinet, Bernard Cord, tried to overthrow him, and then the United States used that as a reason to invade, and it was called the island, and it was called Operation Urgent Fury.
Oh boy,
which is hilarious to me. Urgent Fury. And anyway, and so across the TV screens in America, the idea was that this kind of big bad Black government had overtaken this medical school, which housed a lot of U.S. Citizens, and so it was like, we got to go in and get our people out, and at the same time we better rectify this situation. And so
your dad was still there at this time?
He was still there at the time. He was a kid. And so, to make a long story short, there were a lot of opportunities that were quashed with the ending of the New Jewel movement and the socialist government. One of them being the idea that Grenadian children could go and study abroad.
Really?
Which
so that was the end of that government, in other words.
It was the end of that government. Yeah. They were, and
Wow.
Morris Bishop was executed, not by the United States, but by members of his own cabinet. So it was all kind of this crazy, chaotic situation, which ended in
super dramatic story. Yeah.
Right, in decimated hopes, basically. And so after that, he went to he did a few tours in Canada. He was able to get off the island and be part of a pilot program by the government of Quebec, which took...
Sorry, this is your dad.
This is my dad, yeah. Which took children from war-torn countries and brought them to Canadian high schools and basically had them talk to other Canadian students about the experiences of war.
Interesting.
And so my dad did that twice. And on the second tour, he knew that he wouldn't be able to afford a flight back if he wasn't, chosen to be part of this program again. Mm-hmm. And so he decided to stay and apply for refugee status in Canada. So that's the kind of abridged version.
Sure. How much of this did you know as a kid? Or is this like stuff that you always were aware of, the whole situation in Grenada, and that you had, that he had gone through that?
I mean, I think I was aware, like many children of refugees are aware, which is just like your parents' story is a vague part of your own story.
Sure.
And so you kind of start out as a kid of you being your entire world, and then your vision expands as you get older. And it took me a long time. I actually, I didn't think that his story was interesting. He never really talked about it with me. It was my mom who actually told me a lot of these details.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think maybe my curiosity for this whole story was reignited when I started seeing stories about Syrian refugees, stories about refugees coming up from the Mexican border, and sort of this cycle of what does immigration mean, what does citizenship mean, coupled with the idea of going back to a time like Make America Great Again, or Doug Ford's whole kind of platform.
Right. I mean, social justice is kind of always there's like a thread of it in folk music. It's like kind of a thing, but like it seems like now is really a time where like everybody's interested in it, because it's like, how can you not be? Like,
right,
what is the world right now?
Exactly. And we tend to think of, especially young people, I think tend to think about things in terms of, this is the first thing that has ever happened, and this is terrible. And I think talking to your elders and talking to your parents and your grandparents, I think makes you see that it's just a repetition of
right.
It's just the return of a cycle.
Of course.
And so I think I just needed some perspective, and I needed to have a conversation with him, which we'd rarely had before, start to finish.
Right.
Tell me about your story.
Is he still here, or is he?
Mm-hmm. Well, he lives in Vancouver,
okay, right.
But I think he actually just went back to Grenada, and I think he's eventually just trying to move back.
I see.
Yeah, and he recently got his master's degree, and he's doing really well and stuff.
So having all of that perspective and all that stuff about the history of it, you then went there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
In April, I went there, I think, searching for something. I think as a biracial woman, I have always felt like I don't quite belong in any circle, and I think a lot of biracial people feel that. And so I thought maybe going back to Grenada would provide me with some of the answers that I was looking for. Mm-hmm. And and I don't know. I mean, I think I went back and...
Had you been before?
I had, but as a child, like as maybe 4 or 5.
Right.
It's funny because I remember landing and feeling like so Canadian.
Yeah.
Like I felt like, okay, I'm just gonna go there and like I'm gonna, my Grenadian side is gonna show, but like my accent is so clearly just these round R's, and,
right.
and my cousins were like laughing at me and stuff, like all in fun, but like I realized how much of this country is in me and is part of my identity. And that was a strangely comforting thing, because for a long time I felt like maybe at a loss for identity.
Interesting.
So yeah.
Jews in North America, we have this thing where like, for a long time we've been able to assimilate, but we're always kind of other. And we have this thing with Israel, right, where we like feel like that's kind of a homeland. But yeah, I have the same memory of going back there and being like, I am such a Canadian. I can't like, I understand Hebrew, but I can't really like speak it. Like they,
right.
I stick out here
like
more than at
thumb.
home. Yeah, way more than at home. Anyway, so
yeah, exactly.
So I mean, the trip must have probably influenced a lot of the record, or like do you know that there are bits of that trip in the record? Are there big chunks of that trip in the record?
Huge chunks, yeah.
How long were you there?
I was there for a month. The song Meridian Ground was written there, is about that place, is about that experience.
Right. There's a verse about your aunt. Is that all?
Yeah.
Story? Is that factual? Like what's?
It's all true.
Yeah.
So I had a great aunt. Her name is Tiny, or her name was Tiny, and she was like maybe 5 foot on a good day, and she lived to be something like 93 or 94.
Wow.
And she owned her own house, which is a big deal there. Mm-hmm. And I remember my uncle, who was her caretaker, had told me that it was really hard to care for her in the later kind of years, but that when she passed, he woke up and went into her room and he found her with this big smile on her face and her eyes wide open.
Wow.
And she had died in the night, but it was almost as if she had seen something incredible.
Wow.
And so, those lyrics are woven in there, and kind of stories that are innocuous, but also part of the fabric of my family chain, and something I thought was poetic enough to be included in that story.
When people come in here to make records, songwriters specifically who come in to make their own record and they build things around it, I tend to hear a lot of like people who think what they have on their hands is some kind of a concept record, and that we're going to like move towards this like concept. And sometimes what I have to do is be like, well, wait a minute. It could be great, but like the pieces have to be there, and like the songs should be strong first before there's a concept. Is Grenades a concept record? I think it seems to me like you've achieved this like concept where like the songs are there and then there is this realized concept. Did you think of it that way?
I didn't. I really didn't. I think people started calling it a concept album, and I sort of came around to the idea rather than going at it from a perspective of this is the concept.
Right.
I felt like it needed to have space. I was working with you. I was working with Aaron Costello, who was the producer of this album. And I felt like I needed to be open to whatever it was going to become. And then as it came together, it became clear that, all of these separate puzzle pieces kind of made this clearer picture.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I do have a tendency to work in that way. I think my previous record, 9-Pin, is pretty sonically coordinated. And people have called that a concept album. And I think that's the way I think about art and my art as different ways of expressing a larger mosaic of emotions.
Is the album, this is a total left field and I'm going to get back to Grenades, but is the album important still? Do you feel like you need to put out a set of 10 songs in order to make a statement, or is it the type of thing where like if you have something great that's one song, you want to get it out? You probably haven't done that yet, but I mean, is that something you'd consider? It's kind of the pace that we see in pop music right now, right? That like a single song at a time. It's like back to 1960, right?
Yeah, totally.
But is the album as a format important to you?
I don't think particularly. I mean, I think if I had a song that I felt was a strong enough song to stand on its own, then I would put it out. If I felt like it needed to be contextualized by other things around it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like by the immediate times
by the
or whatever.
Right. I mean, I would love to put out a single though.
Yeah.
I like dream about that of like saying, yeah, check out my single.
Yeah.
Like I've never said that.
Well, I mean, certainly there's like singles from this record in the old school way of thinking, right? Like, songs came out before the record and all that. Anyway, let's
independent. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of like the Weather Station and Jennifer Castle, who put out 2 songs.
Yeah.
And sang on each other's songs.
Yeah.
And I think that in and of itself is a cool concept.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be a whole record. I think that's strong and interesting on its own.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's funny because like you can put your music out so quickly now, right? Like, I mean, you could literally like finish something today, send it to your distro. It could be on Spotify next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how that immediacy. But 40, 50 years ago, that was still possible. There was just a lot more money involved. If somebody needed to get something out in a hurry, it's like they could send it to press really quick. They could get a single out. It's just like it was hundreds of thousands of dollars later. Anyway, okay, back to the record. Okay, so you go to Grenada. You did a bit of writing there. What's the deal with the Smithsonian? You spent a bit of time in the archives or something?
I did, yeah.
And this is after Grenada or what?
This was after Grenada.
Okay.
This was actually, I came back. I had, I think, 2 days at home, not even, and then I went to DC.
Oh, so straight.
So it was I was there and gone.
Tell me about the archives and how they're laid. Like, it's obviously hard materials, right? Like, we're talking about books and records and stuff, right?
You mean like in the actual archives?
Yeah, in the archives itself. Like, it's a library, I guess?
It is, but they also have like a really strong online library, so they've digitized a lot of stuff. So I kind of knew just by looking at their online library what I was gonna be looking for.
Interesting.
Their physical library is very cool. It's just a small portion of the overall Smithsonian libraries, which I advise anybody, if you're like hanging out in DC, to just go for an afternoon and just nerd out. It's you discover amazing stuff. But yeah, I mean, I discovered a recording from the Emery Cook collection, and I don't love all of his stuff, but he went to Grenada and just recorded just kind of, it seems like he just turned his recorder on in a village called Boca.
Okay.
And basically just asked people what songs they knew and what songs they sang, and people
Like
just took turns singing.
Yeah.
It was exactly that. It was a field recording, and there was a really cool melody that a woman was singing on the B side of the tape, and so I kind of lovingly stole that.
Yeah.
And I recorded a bunch of stuff, but I didn't know if they would make their way into the record or not. And it was as the songs were coming together that I could see that, okay, I need this to make this image complete.
Were you writing a lot there, or were you more like amassing stuff and then the writing happened later?
I was writing a lot there. I wrote maybe 2 or 3 songs, so I don't think it represented a huge portion of my writing. I think my writing was evenly distributed between before I went, when I went, and then after I went. I think it was like 3 or 4 songs in each of those periods were written.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so going there, I mean, you had been to Grenada. Do you already kind of have an idea that that's what you were looking into, that this was going to be kind of a Grenada-centric record?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a grant to the Canada Council saying as much.
I see.
And they were, shout out to the Canada Council.
Yeah.
They were really helpful in just giving me the space and time that I needed financially to even do that.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so I knew that it was going to have something to do with it. I didn't necessarily want it to be the whole story, I guess. And so I was really careful about my writing. I wanted to give a more 360-degree picture of everything that I was thinking about. But it was definitely a huge part of why I went. And a lot of the songs wouldn't have been written had I not gone.
I think listening to the record cold, you get a bit of a sense that there's like something going on, with Grenada or with some kind of concept like that. But knowing these little tidbits, I think it's like, oh, you can see more of it in the record. But certainly there's other stuff going on. How's your dad feel about it? He makes a little appearance on the record, right?
Yes, yeah.
More than one? No.
3.
Okay, yeah, 3. Okay.
3 interludes, yeah. So those conversations were taken from a larger conversation that we had last Christmas. We went down into his basement and tried to muffle all the sounds as best as we could, deaden the room. Right. And then I recorded him. I think he's into it. He's had a pretty unique. We've had a pretty unique interaction through my music. I think he always loved music and wanted to show me a lot of music, like all of the hip hop I know. Except my mom showed me the Fugees and a few other people. But my dad had a huge influence and impact in me analyzing poetry and hip hop. So I do have a lot of I do see him as a huge part of my musical development. But we had a tough time when I told him that I wanted to pursue music because he wanted me to pursue my education,
Yep.
you know, and I kind of had to rebuff him. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you don't know anything about that. But I had to rebuff him in a lot of ways and push back and exert my own personality as more than just a shadow of a time, you know,
Sure.
and just kind of say that, like, you know, you came here so that I could have a better life, and like this is the life that I'm choosing, and I promise not to eat ramen, you know, forever, and I promise to grow this in a healthy way. Anyway, and so I think this record has helped with that understanding, and I think has given him more of an anchor to hold on to of like, okay, this is what she's doing, and this is what she's trying to do.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I find that I still sometimes push a little bit, or you know, I have to push a little bit back at my family, although they are amazing and lovely, and they of course are supportive, and I've been doing this a long time. But like, still, it's not you know, choosing this life is like a little, it's a little out there. It's probably, I mean, I'm a parent now, and I think about how like, you know, thinking about your children's choices and like what you want for them and all that stuff, and what you don't want for them is to go out into like a life of uncertainty, which is definitely what the music business can be, right?
Sure.
Yeah, it's pretty funny how that works.
Can I ask how you started playing?
Sure.
music?
Yeah. I mean, I had lessons when I was a kid. Like I had guitar lessons since I was like 8, but it was always like, I think maybe would have been the same for you, where like my parents wanted me to have that kind of skill. They wanted me to develop like that side of my brain or whatever. But it was not really like, it was not a thing that they wanted me to necessarily pursue. With due respect to them, love you guys. They're gonna watch this, I'm sure. But no, it's you know, also like there's no escaping that like in North American Jewish culture, there's a thing where like you push your kids towards being professionals. Like that's a thing. Like people who I went to school with are all like, they're in big business or they're doctor, lawyer. My dad's an accountant. I know a number of accountants. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's a thing that like, that's the path that you follow. You just do. Yeah. So for me to decide to do this as a like a pursuit, I guess I didn't really pull the trigger on it until I started playing steel. That would be it. Because it's sort of a more rare thing. Mm. I remember calling my dad and saying, hey, so I bought this steel guitar, and he was, to him, that doesn't mean anything different than another kind of guitar. And he was like, you already have so many guitars. And I was like, no, this is a different thing. Yeah. And it's going to be kind of a niche for me, I think. And that was like, okay. I think then he understood maybe. But you know what? It probably didn't really make full sense to them until I got a chance, 7-8 years ago, to finally play some like larger shows, do larger tours, like really go super pro. And I think that's when it made sense for them. Yeah,
I do feel like that there's a certain amount of like, I think there obviously there's a lot of ego in music, but I think that's, those are some of the moments when I when you can be like, see, like,
yeah, right.
See, yeah. It's wasn't all just a crapshoot,
No, totally. I kind of hate that has to happen, but it's so true. It's I say this to people who come in to make records sometimes. There are so few accolades in this business. Like I didn't finish any school myself. Like I bounced around to a bunch of different post-secondary schools. I didn't finish any of them because I was already playing steel and this was already my life. And so I didn't have like a cap and gown situation to be like, here I am, I've arrived, I'm a professional now. And there are so few accolades. And you could say that there are awards which are great if you get them, but there's so many people who are like making a living doing this, who are making great art, who like don't get awards and or who may get one in 10 years or whatever. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that the other 9 years they didn't do good work, It's a in that sense, it takes a lot of like self-determination to keep doing this, right? You got to remember that like, what you're doing is good and is valuable and all that stuff, right?
Absolutely. And a lot of like intrinsic direction. But like I see that, with you in your studio and like talking about how, you just decided to do it and decided to make it happen. And I think that's a lot of what music making and music making is. You know, I have started minimally to start to give classes about songwriting, and you know, offhandedly, and or some people ask about advice, you know, and
that won't stop.
But I really don't mind it, but I think a lot of it is just kind of like you gotta just do it. You gotta just do it. And I've been reading Questlove has a new book out called Creative Quest. Okay. And it's very Questlove, and it's awesome, and he has so many like musical digressions, but he talks a lot about that thing of like it's just about doing it and making it work, and being okay with the fact that you're gonna have a lot of valleys. Yeah. You know,
I don't want to be rude to people, but like sometimes I feel like saying, if you have to ask this question, you're already going the wrong, like, you know, you just get on with the show. Like for you to stop and ask me what I did, all I did was did it.
I just did it.
and just like worked through so much, you know, they talk about actors facing all kinds of rejection. Like we're in the same boat. Like, and even like, you know, friends who are like at another tier of, you know, success, they say that like everybody experiences those same kind of valleys. Like people who are already playing like humongous rooms, they might be, you know, they might be shut out of late night TV, and that's a thing that they're aiming for. And people who are on late night wish they were like doing the Super Bowl and they're being shut out or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just like you kind of face constant rejection, and you got to just work through it, right?
Yeah, but I think you're right. It just in terms of like, I can acknowledge that like I've had a certain amount of privilege because I had a parent that already worked in music, so I feel like I definitely had a head start. And like we all have different. We all start from different places, and there's really no school. There's no school that you go to where it can be like, okay, this you do this first, and then you do this, and then this equals, you know. And
you don't hand in your diploma in exchange for like a job making music.
Right. Like that's kind of the thing in the creative arts is you're just you kind of feels like you're shooting in the dark, and some things land and some things don't. Yeah. You know,
just gotta cross your fingers.
Yeah.
I had some questions here I wanted to ask you about. I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but like about the capital F folk music scene that I presume you've probably existed in for a while, and perhaps I don't know. In my mind, this record might sort of hopefully kind of blow you out of those boundaries. But was it important for you to come up through that scene, and did it help to foster you? Was it? I mean, talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely an incubator, I think, when I was a teen into my early 20s, because, you know, I've been playing live to people for 10 years now, and you know, there are not a lot of places that would give like a 15-year-old with a few songs and kind of an idea, like a platform and a stage, and I showcased a lot at conferences like Folk Alliance International, Folk Music Ontario, which happens in Ontario, clearly.
Do you still go in and do those things? Are they important to you, or I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I'll still go in and do them. I think it's important. I think that I also would like to get out of the way for people that still have a lot to gain from those things. Yeah. You know, so I have a new record out, so I'm going to go and do Folk Alliance, but I try and just kind of stay out of the way, because I think it's a really big pond. There are a lot of fish, and you know, if I don't have a new record out, if my showcase can go to somebody who does and who is hustling and working, then that's what I want to do. And you know, I mean, I've had trouble in the folk scene. I think there's a certain amount of lack of self-reflection that happens in the folk scene. There's a lot of nostalgia that goes on. There is, I think, as it with every scene, there's a lot of misogyny. And so so I think growing up in that scene was hard in a lot of ways, but also taught me a lot of valuable lessons. And I have really no attachment to nostalgia in the like kind of let's keep folk this one thing. I think that is useless. It's
Right,
a useless mindset, and I would love to, I admire people like Joni Mitchell and who just had her 75th birthday actually,
Right.
and people kind of think like, oh yeah, like kind of this songbird who's like strumming on the guitar and on the auto harp or dulcimer, and I of course I see that, but I also see like Hissing of Summer Lawns, and I see her doing like weird jazz albums, and like just kind of refusing to be pegged down by anything, and pursuing her own self-actualization in a way that is interesting to her. And to me, that's what I take away from her legacy. And that's why I think she's such a strong, like, impressive artist, is because she's kind of moves around all the time, and so that's what I'd like to see from folk music, and that's what I love to see in the musicians that I love, like Tamra, from who is the Weather Station, and she kind of started out. We had a conversation about how she's a clawhammer banjo player.
Yeah.
And like we had a conversation about that at Newport Folk Festival.
Actually, I kind of forgot that, but that's totally how I first knew of her. Was she played
the banjo?
Clawhammer. Yeah, that's funny.
Right, and she's like has a great record out that's just totally different from that, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Oh, not at all. I was just saying before we started that I finally saw the quote rock and roll Weather Station just a few weeks ago, and man, it was powerful and amazing.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's all centered on her songwriting, which is exemplary.
So good. Yeah. So anyway, so those kind of like those women specifically, Tamra, Joni, and many others, are guiding lights for me in just kind of knowing that I am pursuing a path that is worthwhile.
Right on. I think you probably have like a great cycle ahead of you for this record, so you probably won't think about it for a year or a year and a half. But do you have any idea where you'll head next creatively? Like, do you have any buds that are blooming yet? Like in terms of new material or anything like that?
Probably just get even more rock and roll, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
I recently joined a group, which is the Song a Week group.
Okay.
And it's just me and a like 6 other songwriters of varying genres. And the idea is to write a song a week. And if you don't get it in by the deadline, you're cut off from the next week.
Okay.
And it's about like, I think just being consistent with your writing, and just writing even if it's not the best, even if it's just a verse.
Yeah.
And a chorus. And so I'm looking forward to that, of just like writing regularly and seeing other people's work.
Sure.
And being inspired by that.
Interesting. And sorry, this is Toronto based?
No,
or is it
not
online,
necessarily. It's basically just an email thread and and like a Dropbox.
Cool.
So yeah.
Have you had that kind of thing in the past where you've like felt like you fed off other writers or other singers that were in your zone, or you do a lot of this stuff by yourself, or what?
My writing has been really, really solitary, and I had an experience where I did a few co-writes, and except for one instance, it just felt like the dilution of 2 very good songwriters into one okay song. And I'm
No, I feel, I mean, I know a lot of people who have success with co-writes. It's never worked for me, to be honest. So I totally feel what you're saying.
And I don't know if it sort of feels like going on a blind date or something.
Yeah, right.
Like,
Right. Where you're just expected to just like collaborate creatively immediately with the person you sit down with.
Right.
That I find strange. And like, what I find even more strange is how successful some people are at it. I guess it's just, you have to just like immediately sit down and like either drop all barriers or like size up the person you're with and just like figure out, I don't know.
Yeah. I think it is a skill. Like I saw, two people co-write together. One was like a Danish woman and this American guy, and they wrote just the most awesome like teen love pop song.
Okay.
And I admire it. That was like the first day, and I think it was that. I think they were just like, okay, let's write a good song.
Yeah.
And they were both on the same page, and there was no, nobody was getting offended, or there weren't ideas
Right.
maybe that were being held on to, or whatever. And I think they both just respected each other's songwriting.
Sure.
And I haven't, of course I've loved co-writing with everybody that I have, if they're watching. But
watching.
I haven't found the magical recipe for that.
Right. I mean, I'm sure. Look, you've got like Lennon and McCartney, well, who started, I think, doing that thing where they like got together and they did a thing together. But then very shortly it became like they were writing by themselves, but feeding off each other's thing, right? Like everything was considered Lennon and McCartney, but it was like they had to one up each other privately. Which kind of that became like the essence of their collaboration, which is kind of interesting.
Was it like a competitive? I didn't realize.
Well, like a friendly competitive, I think.
Competitive.
From what I mean, there's been so much written about it. Like, who even knows?
Yeah.
Even like, I'm sure Paul is a little hazy on the exact nature of it at this point.
Yeah.
But no, I think there was a lot of in the early days, a lot of like, I have this piece and I have this piece. Let's put it together. And then as time went on, it was like, here's my latest song. Oh yeah, here's my latest song. That kind of thing. Which also. So I kind of came up in a scene in Hamilton where it was like a bunch of us were in bands and a bunch of us were like in a very friendly and mutually supportive way trying to one up one another, I think a little bit. If one band had, well, that's how I know Mitch. Just coming out of that scene where like there were so many bands and so many like mutually respected people that like if there was a great show, you didn't begrudge your pals from having a good show, but you just wanted to have a better one in a couple weeks,
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of feel like that's what this song a week thing is going to be, is like, if someone writes a really kick-ass song, you're like, oh my God, I gotta do better.
Yeah.
Totally.
Totally.
Cause it's really easy to be lazy. It's really easy to be lazy about it, about staying disciplined. And there's something, there's absolutely something about someone writing a great song or having a great show where you're like, okay, all right, I'm going to do this too. Like, I'm going to go for this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. The last thing I wanted to ask you is just a very basic, what are you listening to? And do you want to tell us about anything that you have discovered lately?
Sure.
And we could even like get it going on the Spotify here.
Yeah.
If you want.
Let me think.
Not to put you on the spot, sorry.
Not to put me on Spotify.
But to exactly put you on the spot.
I'm just thinking.
I find I had like a long period where I like didn't listen to a lot of new music, and sometimes I get in those areas too. Like,
can I pull up my phone?
Yeah, please. Yeah. Have a look.
I know I do have.
No, you cannot pull out your phone. No, I find. For a long time, I was such a curmudgeon. I was like, well, there's just so much in the like 20th century that it still remains uncovered for me and is still going to be so inspirational for me that why wouldn't I seek that stuff out instead of like trying to hear some watered down thing? Like, why wouldn't I? This is a bad example because I kind of love Wilco, but like, why would I listen to the new Wilco record when I can just go listen to like, a George Harrison record that they love that I've never heard, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, why would I like get the neck like down the line? But that's actually, I've kind of grown out of that a little bit. It was a curmudgeonly attitude that I had when I was younger. Now I'm trying to open up myself to new music. When people ask me what I'm listening to, it's mostly like, whatever I was working on these past 2 weeks is literally what's been rattling around my head.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm just looking at my playlist. I have been on that beat of like trying to like rediscover artists that I've always liked. Like, I saw Paul Simon. I was on some late night TV show talking about writing Still Crazy after all these years. And at the time it was like half done. And he was talking about all of the artistic choices he could make. And so that launched me into this like, oh my God, Paul Simon's awesome. And like just like listening to In the Blue Light and listening to like The Rhythm of the Saints and more popular stuff like Graceland and so I have been on that a bit. I've been listening to Saba, who's a Chicago rapper. He has a new album called Care For Me. It's great, and his previous album is also really good. No Name, who's also a Chicago rapper who has a new record out called Room 25. She's awesome. I've been listening to a bit of Randy Newman.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Love Randy Newman.
Great artist.
Fantastic writer.
Like, for some reason, it totally missed that.
Yeah.
Never listened to him.
I only got deep in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned him to me on tour once, and I was like, oh yeah, I should dive in.
Yeah.
And yeah, great.
He's great. He's like the soundtrack to my childhood because he did the Toy Story soundtrack.
Totally.
Which was like, his voice is totally embedded in my being.
And you could hear his little chordal moves on that soundtrack stuff. If you go back to his record, it's like, oh yeah, that's his signature almost. The way he like moves around the piano.
Yeah.
It's funny how people develop styles like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I actually saw someone play who, it was that Wilco thing where like, I was like, oh, this guy has a lot of Randy Newman influence and like is writing great songs.
Right.
I should go listen to like
Randy Newman
songs.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're almost wrapping up, but no, you bring up these couple Chicago rappers, and you know they say, I agree that hip hop is certainly, when it became more conscious anyway, is basically such a huge branch of folk music. Do you like lyrically, are you feeling influenced by hip hop and stuff by MCs?
250%. I think when people are like, oh, what was your biggest influence on Grenades? It was hip hop. I mean, the reason I put interludes into that album is because interludes are so common in rap and hip hop records. Yeah. And like actually skits have been really common on like Wu-Tang Clan and like Fuji's albums. Yeah. But I mean, I think the interludes ones, like, this is sort of branching into R&B, but like SZA put out a record called Control a year ago, a few years ago, and Solange also put out a record called The Seat at the Table, and both of those were featuring conversations with their parents.
Interesting.
And that was a huge influence for me because I realized that like there was always this fear that like maybe it's lame or maybe it's not cool to like have conversations with your parents, which is like the teenager in me, but all these were so poignant, and especially Solange's, it was conversations about what does it mean to be Black and proud, and like just such intimate conversations, and so that, I mean, that's the whole reason why I started talking to my dad about this, and I mean, I think the poetic muscle, like it's a muscular genre. Like if you listen to people like Black Thought, where he raps in such a strong way, and I really admire that ability for lyrics to just be so strong and kind of impenetrable. And I see that in rap and hip hop, I think, much more than I see it in other genres. Right. And I noticed that the artists I like are people who look at lyrics in that way. Like I was just talking about Joni Mitchell and Paul Simon. I mean, they both just write in really interesting ways. And so, yeah, I mean, hip hop, I could go on about hip hop all day. I mean, I
feel like you'll ever, like, do you have any MC skills? Like, I mean, well, you know, like, frankly, on the record, there's moments where like you have kind of a flow, which I think is badass. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. Do you feel like you'll ever sort of branch out of the like acoustic instrument thing, and like, is that important to you?
Well, okay, this is a little known thing, but I did rap on my EP. Oh. It's called Old Soul.
Okay.
And I rapped over...
I'll scroll down on my Spotify page.
Yeah, check it out.
Look at it.
It's kind of funny, but I mean, it was my first foray into like just trying to rap at all. And you know, I don't feel the need to like rebrand myself as a hip hop, like in a hip hop vein. And I know that's probably not what you're asking, but I would love to do that. I mean, I would love to make more pop music and rock music, and I certainly have influences in that direction. And so, yeah, I think I would just like to explore the possibilities of what I can do while doing it well. You know.
Sure, yeah. This is devil's advocate, but you don't think there's a wall there for you as like someone who's come from folk, someone who, you know, is wearing the banjo and such. There's no wall up that you can't push down that'll just take you wherever you want to go musically? You know, like if you were to do those other things?
Yeah, I mean, I have already been getting comments from people, and I sort of can tell that they're mixed emotions of the people, you know, they'll say, you don't have as much banjo in this album.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Right.
not playing as much banjo.
Hilarious.
You know, and I think some people see that
I
as
like
an
your first
exciting
record
thing.
better.
Yeah, like there is. I mean, I like you know, like listening to
yeah.
artists you really love, and you're so. And I had this with Rose Cousins. I loved her first record that was made by the CBC, and then she made another record that like had electric guitar on it,
Right.
and I like.
And you got mad?
I sonically no. I mean, I think yeah. I had an emotional reaction
Yeah,
to it,
sure.
and like later totally settled into it and loved it.
Yeah.
But I remember just being like, how dare she do this to me?
You know, I travel a bit with Dan Romano. I've toured with him off and on, and he made this very like country record, right? Come Cry With Me, where he's wearing the hat and a rhinestone suit on the front.
Great
and then
album cover.
Right. And then 2 years later, first of all, he's the kind of guy who like we played those songs out before that record came out. And then by the time it was out, it was like he was on to something else. But yeah, we would be in the Netherlands, and guys would show up to the show in full cowboy regalia and wonder why the show instead was like a Rolling Thunder Revue, like big 70s rock and roll show. And they would be so confused and mad. At the merch table, they'd be like, we do not understand.
Great.
And I hate to like laugh at the people who were paying my salary, but that's, I totally identify as a fan. Like, yeah, there's definitely bands where I'm like, well, it's really only the first 2 records for me.
Yeah.
And like, beyond that is when like shit got weird.
Yeah,
But then like, I'm also on the train where like, I'll listen to a new Neil Young record, like 50 records in, like I'll check it out. I think he still has something to say, and that's a weird example because he's so old. but I definitely think someone like that has something to say.
Yeah, and like, it's cool to see people like, Buffy St. Marie.
Yeah,
like I think she's really the epitome of that. Like kind of started off in the 60s wave and was doing like Cripple Creek on the mouth harp. Mm-hmm. And other like really cool stuff and has found a way, like through Power in the Blood and stuff and other records, has found a way to continue to reinvent herself and make music that is interesting to her. Mm-hmm. And to perform it in a way that she's passionate about, I think, I think that artists can lose that when they rely too much on what people expect of them. When we rely too much on what people expect of us.
Yeah.
That's
very interesting.
Yeah. But it's, yeah. We could go on forever about this.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Like,
well, I mean, I think it's probably pretty good that you're like, you feel good about just moving forward in whichever way you feel good about.
Oh,
that's the way to do it. You have a bunch of touring coming up, is that right?
I do, yeah.
Where are you going?
So I am playing in Wakefield, Quebec.
Right. Well, you spent some time, right?
Yeah. I lived there for a long time.
Awesome town.
Great town.
Love it.
I'm going to be playing in Toronto at the Rivoli on the 20th.
Cool.
And I'm also playing in Halifax on the 25th.
Nice.
Yeah.
And beyond that, anything planned?
Beyond that, I'm going to...
You gonna see where the record takes you?
Yeah, I'm going to Europe in January and
Great.
May.
And you've done Europe before, right?
I have, yeah. So that's gonna be really fun. I'm touring as a trio now with a lap steel and guitar player.
Cool. Christine, you bringing her?
I'm bringing somebody named Dan Rougeau, and he's actually kind of a quasi student of Christine's. She showed him her lap steel parts, and
cool.
And he's gonna play electric guitar too. So I think he's pretty stoked on making the sound
nice,
true to the record.
To the record.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, have a great time out there.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, it was
really
fun.
Great to talk to you.
Likewise.
Yeah. And congrats on a sweet record.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
It's good to be back.
Yeah. Right on. Okay. Well, thanks for listening to the Southern Souls podcast. Episode number, we're not sure. I've been your host, Aaron Goldstein, coming to you from Baldwin Street Sound. Thanks to Mitch Fillion for doing all that he does and being Mr. Southern Souls. Tune in next time.